we get one from mom and one from dad. But on each of those chromosomes is a bunch of information, a bunch of code. This thing's just a little too shaky and I don't want to spill it all over. I'll make you a cup of tea if you like, but you don't want to sip mine. And more to the point, I don't want you to. No, I mean, we all do. But anyway, that felt rude. But anyway, moving on. So, humans are diploid. Which means we have 2 copies of each chromosome.
I have 4.
And we have 23 unique chromosomes. All right. Don't worry, we'll talk. I'm going to write it first.
You need to think about how to spell it.
I do.
It's silly.
Okay.
Oh, I can't spell.
Oh, now I'm having a moment. Oh, geez. Now they both look wrong to me. Okay, so I'm going to have to quickly go to the dictionary. Do you ever do the thing where all of a sudden you're staring right at the spelling of something but it looks wrong?
I do that with like small.
Does that happen to you?
I get like 20,000.
It'd be the most simplest words too.
I remember when I was younger, you used to show
I think it's double L at the beginning, but for some reason, yeah, it is. Okay,
Allele.
perfect. Yeah. Can and will. How's that? Is that enough? So I totally psyched myself out there, but now I'm looking at that, and even though I know it's right, it looks so wrong to me. Okay, we have 3 words here to work with. Somebody read this sentence for me. Go for it. Yeah. Very close, yeah, alleles. Very good. Those 2 words are tricky. Ready?
Allele. Allele. Allele.
Oh, it doesn't give me the... Oh, I need pronounce.
Homologous. Homologous.
Let's give it an awkward pronunciation, actually. Homologous. Just homologous. Okay, so the homologous chromosomes contain the same genes, but different alleles. Ready?
Oh.
What the hell does that mean? Okay, well, let's break it down. So let's use as an example, that's a highlighter.
Wow.
Let's use as an example chromosome number 1. Okay, so we're going to look at chromosome number 1. And chromosome number 1, before replication, here we go. We've got a copy that's from our mother, and we've got a copy of the exact same chromosome that is from our father. Does that make sense? Well, remember, it's the DNA itself, which looks like this, then gets coiled like this. So it would go whoa, 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 like that. And then they take that coil and they coil that. And then that happens 2 more times. Yeah, it's called coiling and supercoiling.
Whoa.
Good names, right? Okay, so this is chromosome number 1 from the biological mother. This is chromosome number 1 from the biological father. Does that make sense? We say that these are homologous chromosomes. And what that means is that they are, well, they contain the same genes. And what's a gene? Well, what it means is that in the chromosome, there's a section of that chromosome where there is a string of DNA that codes for a single specific thing. So this is a gene. That's not a great color, is it? That's going to look too much like red. There we go. It was very good. Very good. I'll laugh later. This is a single gene. And it's the same on both. Since it's homologous, it is on both copies of the chromosome. All right? And what does a gene code for? It codes for a specific trait. Yeah, it codes for a specific protein, but that will lead to a specific trait. For example, eye color, right? It's actually controlled by a couple of genes, but we'll pretend it's just coded by one. So we could look and we could say, okay, somewhere on chromosome 1, there's a gene that codes for eye color. And because I have a copy of chromosome 1 from my father, that means I have a copy of the eye color gene on that chromosome. But I also have the homologous chromosome number 1, the one from my mother, and it also has eye color. But then what we can say is this. Many genes, most genes really, have different versions of the trait. Let's stick with the eye color. What are some of the versions of eye color we see as a result of that gene? Yeah, blue eyes, brown. You can have green eyes, right, or kind of gray eyes. Polka dot. Yeah. Okay, we get the idea. We call these different alleles of the same gene. In other words, the instruction that makes somebody have blue eyes is found in this spot on chromosome number 1. But the instruction that makes somebody have brown eyes is also found in this spot on chromosome number 1. Does that make sense? It's the same spot, it's the same gene, it's just that it's a slightly different version of it. It says, hey, we're going to build this protein that's going to work in your iris of your eye and it's going to do the job, but it's a slightly different build, and because it's a slightly different build, it has a different color. Two different alleles, two different copies, two different versions of the same gene. Now, they don't have to be different. If your father comes from a biological father, comes from a long line of brown-eyed individuals, and your biological mother comes from a long line of brown-eyed individuals, then it's very likely that the allele you got from mom and the allele you got from dad are the same. They don't have to disagree. They can agree, but sometimes they do disagree.
Isn't blue eyes like a mutation?
Yeah, well, everything's mutation. Every single trait you have is mutation. Remember, life started as a single cell. Did blue eyes come along later? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but it could have. Yeah. We're going to do a whole bunch of days on that, so I'm going to just put a pin in that. It's a great question. It's the best question. It's the leading question of my next lesson, so we're just going to hold off on that. Is that fair? But it's an excellent question. The question was, well, what if your mom has the blue-eyed gene and your dad has the brown-eyed genes? Do you get one of each? That can happen, by the way. You ever seen that? Seen photos of people who have two different eye colors? But that's a whole different mutation. That's a whole different thing. That's not the standard outcome. I don't know too many dichromatic. Go right. You're good. So why is this useful? Well, it's helpful to remember that because an individual's traits are the result of their genes, and the maternal trait, the maternal alleles and paternal alleles work together in different ways to make different final traits. We'll do a whole lesson on that. But that's important kind of table setting for what we're really going to talk about today, which is, of course, maybe you have the blue-eyed gene from mom and the brown-eyed gene from dad, but when you go to pass the eye color gene onto your kid, you don't pass them both on. You pass off just one of them, right? So sex cells, does anyone remember the other name for sex cells? Yeah, very good. So sex cells, called gametes, get made by what process again? Meiosis. Good. That's okay. Get made by meiosis, and contain at random only one of each chromosome. And when I say at random, what do I mean is random? Because it will have a copy of chromosome 1, it'll have a copy of chromosome 2, it'll have a copy of chromosome 3 all the way down to 23. So what's random about that? It gets all 23 chromosomes. What's the random part?
Where the chromosome comes from, either from like the paternal or maternal.
That was a good answer. Were you going to say the same, or?
Yeah, but also, like, is it possible to have chromosome 20 to 22 all from your mother and then just one from your father?
Can happen. Absolutely. And that's a great... Have you taken data management yet? Anyone here taken data management? It could happen, but remember, we said altogether there's like 8 million different ways you could make sperm or an egg cell, right? It wasn't exactly 8, but remember that we said. So for that to happen, how many ways can that happen? You'd have to guarantee that you get mums 1, guarantee that you get mums 2, all the way down. There's only one way to make that egg cell. So it can happen, but the odds of that would be 1 in 8 million. Does that make sense? But having said that, is there somebody out there where that's happened? Been a lot more than 8 million people on the earth, so probably. And that's a great question. Remember, improbable things happen all the time because stuff happens all the time. So yeah, definitely possible. And a great question. I like that question a lot. I can.
Would that affect anything else? Like, would you...
No, but I will tell you, like, if you've ever had, I have a cousin who looks... It's so bizarre, but when my grandparents died, my grandfather died about 3 years ago, and my grandma died last year, but when my grandfather passed away, I took on the job of scanning all of their photos, and they had slides, like in carousels from like the 50s, and scanning all of the like film that they'd shot over their whole life. And it was really cool. It was really neat. We scanned like over like 15,000 pictures and like video and stuff like that. But what blew my mind was my Uncle Stephen, when he was a kid, looked just identical, I swear, to his son, like my cousin Peter, when he was a kid. You could not possibly know the difference. And like, he looked similar to, like, my cousin Peter has 2 other brothers, and they both look kind of like their dad, whatever. But I swear Peter looks like he could be a clone. And you think it's got to be something like that. Like, it's got to be the case that he got a lot of, one set of traits that, like, it's just really funny how that happens. And you probably know cases like that. There'll even be cases where, like, you have a grandkid and you're like, man, that looks just like their grandfather, right? Like all those years ago. Yeah, it's got to be a case like that, right? Where it seems like more of one set happened. And again, 8 million is a lot of different ways to make a sperm cell, but it's not an infinite number, right? So like, yeah, there's going to be cases where it's mostly one set of data that gets passed along. That's a great question. And in fact, that's exactly what we're going to talk about here. So now which copy of each chromosome goes ends up in a sex cell is determined in what stage again? We just talked about this. Yeah, in which stage of meiosis? Yeah, very good. Ends up in each gamete is determined in anaphase 1. And that's not new information. We talked about that yesterday. This is called random assortment. Now I'm having another moment. Does assorted have two S's?
Yes.
Why does that look so wrong to me? I'm having a day where everything I write looks like I've misspelled it. Yeah, you know what? That might be it. I think you're right. This is called random assortment. And just to show a quick diagram, we can remind ourselves that during metaphase 1, the chromosomes line up at the center, right? And I am showing, for simplicity's sake, maternal as purple and paternal as blue. And what we're going to say is that there's no rhyme or reason to which one goes there. So every time you go and we say, okay, let's take chromosome 1, which one's going to go to the left? You could just flip a coin. Does that make sense? Anyone got a coin?
You want a coin?
Yeah, flip a coin for me. Heads or tails? Purple, we're going to go left, and purple is heads, blue is tails. Let's go. Let's actually do this randomly. We're going to randomly assort into anaphase. Yeah? No, you do it. You do it. Oh, yeah, you do it. Oh, okay, I'll do it. Oh, you really can't. Okay. You weren't bluffing. Okay, so if it's heads, we'll do purple to the left, okay? For the first one. And it is tails. So that means the blue one for chromosome 1 is going to go to the left, and the purple one goes to the right. And now we look at chromosome 2. Does that make sense? So we just took care of these ones. Now let's do these ones. We'll do the same thing. If it's heads, we'll put purple to the left, okay? And it was heads. So purple will go to the left. Okay? And now we're going to do the third one. I'll take away that highlighter because otherwise I'll look at it after and say, why was that highlighted? And now we'll do this pair and we'll do the same thing. Heads means purple to the left. What do we think? Heads. Okay. And of course, the reason you couldn't guess is because there's no pattern to it, right? It's random. It's not like you can say, well, this happened last time. So the pattern is random, whether it goes left or right. Does that make sense? And that happens during anaphase 1. How's that? No problem. Take a minute. But the truth is, you're actually even more complicated than that. Do you know that? Do you feel complicated sometimes?
Oh.
Like nobody could possibly understand you? Well, guess what? You're complicated. Nobody could possibly understand you at a very molecular level. Yeah. Well, the cell itself is still diploid. It still has 2 there. But that doesn't really mean much because we're in the process of turning that 1 cell into 2 cells, right? So I guess right now you'd still say it's diploid since it still has 2 copies in the cell, but it doesn't really mean anything because the cell's not doing anything right now. It's just reproducing. And once this gets split into 2 cells, each one will be haploid. Did that answer your question? Great. Okay, but there is a second piece at work here, and that's what we're going to look at here, which is called crossing over. And this isn't like crossing over like into the next plane of existence. This isn't a euphemism for dying, is what I'm saying. My son is 5. He's on a real dying kick right now. We've had some family members die, so we've been like having frank conversations with him. And And he's like doing well. He's coping well. But then like you realize like the things kids take up. So like we've been talking about how, you know, sometimes people get sick and they don't get better and they die. And then like I had a cold last week and he was like, do you have a cold? And I said, yes. And he said, are you going to die? And I said, no. And I said, well, I mean, yes, eventually, but not soon. Probably. Right? How do you answer that question? Right? Because like, well, sure, yeah, because yes, right? So like everyone dies eventually. And so if nobody's told you this, yeah, man, this is one of those moments. This is like a moment where I just told somebody Santa isn't real and they didn't know that in class. So I hate to tell you this, one day. Well, guy, yeah, well, again, like just to be clear, like he's had a bunch of people in his family die over the last bunch of years. But then, but you can see like it starts to click. So then the other day he stubbed his toe and he's like, my toe's bleeding. And I said, put a Band-Aid on. And they said like, am I going to die? And I'll have you know, I didn't say eventually. I just said no. But you realize like the wheel's spinning, right? That like these things are hard to answer. So crossing over, not in the euphemism for death sense, but just in the well, we'll talk about. So we get even more genetic variations due to a process called crossing over. And we'll talk about what that means. Oh, and sorry, I'm going to do a little subheading here. This is where identical genes, not identical, that's not true. Sorry, the same gene from homologous chromosomes, and this is actually crazy. Are sometimes cut out of the DNA. Just think about this for a minute. Now this is crazy. The cell, this doesn't happen by random chance. The cell has a machine that does this. And if you think about it, it's pretty crazy. It actually says like, okay, we've got the eye color gene over here on chromosome 1 from mom. And we've got the eye color here gene from chromosome 2 from dad. And the cell actually will go in and cut that gene out and carry it over here and splice it in and then cut it out over here and carry it over there and it swaps them. Now that's crazy. Think how complicated that is. Think also how dangerous that is, right? You're talking about your blueprint. Why does the cell do this? And the answer is that at some point that happened. That was a thing that started happening. And for whatever reason, it survived and thrived. And so it became something that got passed along evolutionarily. And now that's the thing our cells do. But it's pretty crazy. So we can draw a picture of that. So this happens during meiosis. So the chromosomes would be duplicated by this stage. So because they're duplicated, this is where it gets really crazy. So there's chromosome 1 duplicated from mom. So chromosome 1, maternal, and that's duplicated, right? Are we okay with those short forms?
Yes, sir.
That makes sense? Okay. Now over here, we have chromosome 1, and it's from dad, and it is also duplicated. Okay.
You have me drawing pictures over here.
Sorry?
I said you have me drawing pictures over here.
I know. You know, I used to always do this with handouts, and I discovered along the way that I really think there's value in drawing it. Even if you're like me and crappy at art, it does help you think about it. So now let's look here. That like eye color gene. Let's go back to this imaginary single gene that controls your eye color, since it's more complicated than just one gene. But let's pretend. Well, how many places does it appear here now? Well, we've got it here, but of course we also have it here, right? Does that make sense? And then we also have it here and there. Does that make sense? Because it's duplicated, how many copies of the eye color gene do we have right now? We actually have 4, right? So here's what can happen. Here's the crazy thing. Is that this one and this one, if they're next to each other, can actually swap.
Oh, I didn't know that they mixed each other.
And again, when we say they swap, it really means the cell cuts this one out, right? It goes in with like little cell scissors and cuts that, and then cuts that, and then trades places for them. Does that make sense? So then what do we end up with? Well, what we end up with is chromosome 1 from mom, and it's still got chromosome 1's original mom eye color gene, but now we have chromosome 2 from dad, and then what do we have in the middle of it? Oh, sorry. Now we still have chromosome 1 from mom, but then what do we have right in the middle of it? That little section of DNA from dad for eye color. Sorry, guys, I find it hard to focus. There's people talking over me. And then over here, we have our chromosome from dad, except it's got a little break in it where it's got some DNA that actually comes from the maternal chromosome. And again, I can't stress enough, that's actually kind of bonkers, to use a highly scientific term. Bonkers. Because now we have chromosome 1 from mom, duplicated, but it includes this little crossed over gene, right? And then we have chromosome 1 from dad, and it's duplicated, but it includes that one crossed over gene.
I put it on the wrong side.
Sorry?
In my drawing, I put it on the wrong side.
But does it make sense?
Yes.
This is a weird process. Now, when does this happen? There's only one time it can happen, really. Or at least, I shouldn't say that. What does it have to happen before? Does it have to happen before? It has to happen before anaphase, because in anaphase, these things get ripped away from each other, right? Not ripped apart until anaphase 2. In anaphase 1, they get ripped away from each other. In anaphase 2, they get ripped apart, right? So this actually happens during metaphase. And metaphase 1 or 2? Very good. It happens during metaphase 1 when the chromosomes are lining up at the equator. That was chromosomer I accidentally wrote. It occurs to me that, like, it sounds like the worst supervillain ever. It's the chromosomer. Anyway.
What's his power?
I don't know. It gives you mutations.
Oh.
If you look up in textbooks, they always have really cute diagrams of crossing over where it looks like the chromosomes are like hugging each other and like exchanging sections of DNA. I'm not going to attempt to draw that. If any of you is very good at drawing art, you could make an effort. But again, it happens during metaphase 1 when we have, there's chromosome 1 from mom, and now maybe there's chromosome 1 from dad, and then lined up below that is chromosome, and some crossing over can take place here. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And what we could have is a situation where, like, oh, that gene and that gene, they're going to do an old switcheroo. And this gene and that gene, they're going to do the old swapperoo too. That's the scientific term for it. The old swapperoo. That's it for today. Thank God. So much time to spare.
30 seconds.
Yeah. Yeah. Guys, by the way, we're going to do some colonies again later with actual experiments, but I am going to pitch out I'm going to safely dispose of, seal up, and then get rid of your samples. But if you want to go take a look at how they ended up turning out, they are in there. And, they've grown some interesting stuff.